Well, thank you. Thank you so much, Pramod, for arranging this discussion and for inviting me to this very distinguished panel. It's a great delight to be part of the nice event, and thank you so much. And a very good morning to all the distinguished panelists, and it's a pleasure to be in this company. So let me begin by making a few comments with regard to the theme that we have before us. I noticed that there are three words that are mentioned: strategy, security, and diplomacy. So before I get into that, I would like to divide my comments into three broad parts. One is the objective realities which characterize the Indo-Pacific region and which we have to take into account as the given. And whatever we do in the region has to be based on these objective realities. And these objective realities are born from geography, from history and culture. And what we can see and what we have seen historically is that the Indo-Pacific is a highly complicated arena. It is not just complicated, but clearly it is an arena for future contestation from a geostrategic lens. And this is something that is very important for us to understand, that when we discuss and talk about the Indo-Pacific, we are in a sense talking about future challenges. Secondly, the Indo-Pacific does not lend itself to any binary divisions, as we saw in the Cold War period or in the European or the Western theater. It is difficult to transpose mechanically the architectures and structures that were created and established in Europe onto the Indo-Pacific region. And clearly, China is not the Soviet Union of the Cold War era. So the implication of all this is that because it is complicated, because it is futuristic in its dimensions and its implications, and there is no binary division in the region, it is difficult to talk of an architecture as we did in Europe. And therefore, what we also have to look at is whether we have the ability and whether we should try to transpose or carry forward those European architectures onto the region. But more importantly, I would say, in the light of Ukraine, etc., what are the lessons we can learn from Europe when we look at the Indo-Pacific region? And there are many lessons that we can learn and take away when we look at the Indo-Pacific region. Of course, the Indo-Pacific region is also characterized by the dramatic rise of one power and also with asymmetry of power within the region. And this informs and affects the behavior of states that are part of the Indo-Pacific region. So, with the exception of Western allies like Japan, Korea, Australia, New Zealand, the fact is that in many ways the anchor for the Indo-Pacific region continues to remain the ASEAN countries. And this is something, again, we have to take into account. It seems to me that the contestation in the Indo-Pacific region, unlike in Europe, is not so much on the grounds of ideology or on ideological contestation, but it is going to be more a contestation of civilizational values and assertion of civilizational heritages, etc. So this is a big difference between what we have seen in Europe and what we will see or are seeing in the Indo-Pacific. So these are some of the objective conditions. We also know, for example, that the ASEAN approach to great power competition is fundamentally different from that of, for example, Europe in the US-Russia context. The ASEAN as a grouping and as individual states have evolved their own very Asian approach to managing the US-China contestation and competition. And this is something which we need to take into account and also learn from. Of course, these are the objective conditions. Now, the second part of what I wanted to put forward and suggest was that these objective conditions are accompanied by subjective or normative conditions, or what we can call the behavioral aspects that are shaped by policies and by state actors and personalities. So, from this point of view, the forthcoming 4 years under the Trump administration in the United States is going to be a critical factor in how we see events unfolding in the Indo-Pacific region. Clearly, we will see based on all the accounts and all the statements we have heard during the election campaign in the United States, a concerted shift away from the American preoccupation with the Russia threat and Europe to the Indo-Pacific. And this is going to create its own ripple effects and dynamics, and everyone here, including India, would have to be prepared to deal with it and also to be able to analyze and understand the true import of this reset or this shift. Similarly, if we talk about personalities and behavioral aspects, I think clearly we are living through the era of Xi Jinping for the last 10 years, and this is a different China. So we have to also take into account how the current Chinese Communist Party and its leadership behave within the region and globally. The question of whether the Communist Party and the Chinese leadership structure and the political structure is resilient or has internal fault lines or is vulnerable to external pressure is another factor that we have to also arrive at a considered analysis and assessment. Based on these two aspects of the objective conditions and the behavioral aspects, I would say if I try to weave the theme of the session, the question to my mind would probably be, in my opinion, what is the strategy that we need to attain equal and indivisible security for all countries in the Indo-Pacific? And what is the kind of diplomacy that we need to attain this objective of security, and how important is going to be the diplomatic effort in this overall strategy that we want to carve out or we want to create to ensure security for everyone in the region. So this is maybe the fundamental challenge that we are going to see and we are going to be faced with today. My last point, of course, is what do we need? Yes, we need security, but how are we going to attain and achieve that security? What we need in Asia, in the Asia-Pacific or the Indo-Pacific region, is, in the light of the previous comments I have made, is a balance of power and not domination. We certainly do not need a unipolar Asia or an Indo-Pacific region. We need multipolarity, whether it is in terms of economic manufacturing nodes in the region, technology supply chains, cultural heritages, civilizational values. And we have to ask ourselves whether there is indeed an Asian way to achieve this balance of power. And what can we do collectively to either influence or modulate or alter or shape Chinese behavior and shape its great power ambitions such that its continuing rise does not threaten the region. These are the questions I think that are in front of us, and here the role of external powers becomes important. Now, the question, of course, will be how do we define who is an external power and who is a resident power? The United States is of the view that it is a resident power. The Russians have a Pacific fleet, and they are very much present in the Pacific Ocean. They also straddle the Eurasian landmass. So a lot of this dynamic in the region is going to flow out from both the behavior of resident powers as well as, let's say, extraterritorial or maritime powers. Clearly, one of the characteristics of the region is the heavy focus on the maritime dimension of security and of interstate interaction, which is again different from Europe. Taiwan is one of the flashpoints. There are other flashpoints emanating from decades-old legacy disputes, maritime disputes that China has with its neighbors, India has with its neighbors. These will continue to inform our security challenges, but I'm not quite sure whether countries of the region, particularly China's own neighbors, would be comfortable with a war over Taiwan, whether they would like to avoid escalating the Taiwan conflict to a hot war or a hot situation. My impression is that most of the ASEAN countries, despite having problems with China, would rather prefer to be able to live in such a way as to balance the tensions and pressures that they receive from major powers in their day-to-day management of their foreign policy, their economic policy, their investment policy, etc. So these are some broad comments I thought I would just flag to enable further discussion, some thoughts, and maybe I'll just stop here. Thank you so much.